Cool. So what's going on, guys? This is Dan Weichart of Weichart Media, sponsored by the Badass Patriot Co. If you haven't already, slide on over to badasspatriotco.com, grab some sweet merch. That's one of the best ways you can support this particular channel. So apparently, child sex trafficking has just been blown out of proportion. So we'll get into it, and so we thank you for joining us. So like I said, my name is Dan Weichart of Weichart Media. Recently, there's been a lot of hay made over the movie The Sound of Freedom, starring Jim Caviezel. It details the following of a DHS agent who kind of goes rogue to save a young girl from child sex trafficking. And for some reason, it seems like there's just been a lot of weird stuff said about this movie. So before we get into it, I do want to give you guys a kind of a brief overview of what exactly it means to be trafficked. Like, what does that mean? I had the privilege of being in law enforcement in both the local and federal level during my time. And so I actually have a little bit of a unique perspective on that. It's not really unique. It's just sort of inside baseball. So when someone says traffic or trafficking, what they're talking about is the movement typically of people against their will across a border. Now, in the United States, you could be charged with trafficking domestically if you kidnap somebody and transported them across state lines, right? So that's a way that you could be charged with trafficking there. Federally speaking, it's when someone is trafficked across national borders. So as a great example, a lot of times individuals who are being smuggled from across the southern border into the United States, smuggling tends to be just the illicit movements or the illegal movement of goods or people across borders, not necessarily against individuals' will. So people who are legitimately, or not legitimately, but who are trying to get into the country and want to come into the country will oftentimes pay cartels in Mexico to have a coyote, which is the term of art for the individual who will guide people across the border, have a coyote transport illegals across the southern border into the continental United States. That's smuggling, right? Because those individuals want to be trafficked. Smuggling can also refer to the idea of just moving goods or services just in an illegal or illegitimate manner. Now, interesting fact, and this really dovetails in the whole idea of sex trafficking or just trafficking in people generally. A lot of times, what will happen, individuals will approach these cartels and coyotes, and they'll say, hey, I need to get across the southern border. The cartels and coyotes will take their documentation, take money, particularly like passports, IDs, things that they might need once they get in country to actually function properly, and say, hey, we're going to hang on to this as collateral to make sure you don't do something silly while we're trying to transport you. They transport them across state lines into the U.S., those individuals' documents are passed off to somebody else, and now it becomes trafficking because that person is saying, hey, actually, we still have your documents. You owe us a lot of money. We're going to turn you into the States unless you stick around and do as we say here in country. So that's trafficking as opposed to smuggling. So I think that actually goes to speaking to a lot of people about what do these things mean? Actually, another interesting nexus, Andrew Tate has recently came out of nowhere. Not really came out of nowhere, but he recently had a pretty bombshell interview with Tucker Carlson. If you haven't watched that, it's definitely a good watch, regardless of how you feel about Mr. Tate. Mr. Tate stands accused of trafficking himself in, not literally trafficking himself, but he himself stands accused of trafficking out of Romania, which he refutes in his interview with Tucker Carlson. They actually get into this topic. So if you want another interesting take on the idea of what does it mean to be trafficking, there's that, because he's literally charged with human trafficking, but what he did is not that, at least by way of the documents that we've seen on his particular charges. So regardless of how you feel about the guy, you obviously want to make sure that people, if you're going to get charged with a crime, you actually get charged with the crime they have committed. Anyway, jumping on to the controversy, I suppose, that surrounds The Sound of Freedom. So this really interesting thing has happened where, for some reason, the left has come out stating that this is somehow connected to some kind of conspiracy theory. Now, I'm being a little facetious with a somehow component. The connection that they are drawing is that Jim Caviezel has, on multiple occasions in interviews about the movie, referenced what is largely a popular quote unquote QAnon theory that global elites are not only trafficking and having sex with children, but murdering them and harvesting their blood, and specifically adrenochrome, which is a hormone excreted by a pineal gland, in some sort of like weird cult ritual sacrificed, also doubling as a fountain of youth. And insert any number of jokes about any number of leftist politicians who all of a sudden got cut off from their power, and then they end up looking like the Crypt Keeper warmed over. So regardless of that, that's what the sort of the conspiracy theory is. However, the movie itself doesn't dip into any of that. It's just about a guy who is anti-sex trafficking for children, and he goes on a hunt. The movie is also has a pretty heavy religious overtones. So that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So to kind of assist in this quest, if you will, for knowledge, I'm going to bring up some articles here, and we'll get to it. So let's jump over here. So first, this one's from Slate by an individual by the name of Sam Adams. Probably no relation to the founding father or the beer company, I'd imagine. I'm going to skip a big chunk of this, but there's some interesting parts about this particular article that I find interesting. So this being the starting here. So I'll highlight this paragraph as I read it out. So the pedophiles and child traffickers in Sound of Freedom are sweaty, sharp-toothed deviants, as they've been depicted in movies as far back as Fritz Lang's M nearly a century ago. But the movie darkly hints that there are more well-connected and outwardly respectable variants out there, willing to pay six figures and up for what Caviezel's character, who poses as a businessman trying to set up a high-end members-only club for child rapists, calls, quote, a little pedo action, close quote. And he goes on to say that although the movie makes no reference to QAnon or the associated conspiracy theories, that somehow or another this movie is a magnet for quote-unquote far-right extremists. It goes on later on down here, and I'll click away, where that questions the gentleman, Mr. Tim Ballard, who the movie is based upon. Let me get that highlighted. He's claimed that 10,000 children are smuggled into the U.S. for sex every single year. Now, to be fair, this article cites that this is just an unsubstantiated claim rather than outright false. But I find this whole concept, this whole paragraph, it's really strange. This is a great example as to what the left seems to be suggesting about this movie. First off, a lot of hay is made over this like QAnon stuff. The movie does not reference that. Then nextly, a lot of hay has also been made about the Mr. Ballard's suggestion that tens of thousands or 10,000 or so children are trafficked in the United States for sex trafficking. And then thirdly, and this is the main thing here that I find really strange, is he references this particular writer or references the fact that the movie hints at this idea that there are actually a lot more well-connected, seemingly respectable individuals who peddle in child sex trafficking, but doesn't state it outright, which I find really strange, as if we did not have, not 5 seconds ago, it seems like, the whole Jeffrey Epstein saga, where it comes to find out we have this guy who is the concierge, if you will, of the rich and powerful. He literally owns an island where he houses a bunch of underage persons so that people can fly to that island on the Lolita Express, his private jet, and have sex with minors. Like, we didn't just see that. And that individual is alleged to have killed himself. And it's as if we don't know that his number two, Ghislaine Maxwell, a lady, is also in custody. And it's almost as if they think, or they're acting like we don't also know, as a matter of record, that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's sort of little black book of contacts exists. And within it are reportedly a ton of people who are very rich, very powerful, very famous. You might say outwardly respectable. So I find it really strange that it's hinting that this article suggests that this movie's hinting that there are actually quote unquote respectable looking individuals who are engaging in child sex trafficking is a ridiculous concept or far-fetched or some kind of conspiracy theory. Like, we literally didn't just witness the supposed suicide of Jeffrey Epstein along with the sort of quiet prosecution of Ghislaine Maxwell. Like, we didn't just see that. So that part's really strange. That aside, a lot of big things have been made over Mr. Ballard's supposition that tens of thousands of children are trafficked into the United States per year. Real quick, let me jump over to this one. So this is from the Human Trafficking Institute, and it's a breakdown of global estimates on human trafficking or human trafficking awareness and so forth as of 2022. So just a couple of quick stats: 24.9 million victims of human trafficking on a per year basis, 20.1 million labor trafficking victims, and of that, 4.8 million sex trafficking victims. Now, 4.8 million sex trafficking victims globally. How much of that comes into and out of the United States? Is it 10,000 or so? Who knows? Who knows? I was trying to look up, and this is the other really interesting part, and I'll jump over here. I was trying to look up legitimate statistics as to whether it's the FBI or whomever, who has good stats on how many people have been apparently transported into the United States for purposes of sex trafficking. So as you go through this, so firstly, start with the first. This is the first thing that caught my eye. For some reason, the State Department's website is just down on this subject. And it's down on this subject across the board. Now, I don't know if this actually speaks to a larger outage for State Department's websites, generally speaking, but I just find that really strange. So let me actually take a minute to go through that. So human trafficking, carry on. I'm looking for the human trafficking statistics. All right, here's 2020. No, this is not this one. So here's one. 2022 Trafficking in Persons Report, United States. This is, again, from State Department. Out of commission. You scroll down a ways. There's the 2023 one that we'll get to here in a moment. Here's 2021, right? Click out. Really weird. Then there's here's 2020. Nothing. I just find that really strange. Just very, very strange. Here's 2019. Nothing. Right? So I don't know if because this topic has become super popular, that all of a sudden the State Department's websites and resources on this subject maybe have become jammed up, and it's not the website's just not used to this level of traffic. Entirely possible. So I'm not throwing that out I'm not throwing that out there like that's ridiculous. I'm just saying it's strange. Regardless, I was trying to look up some decent statistics on that. There's tons of statistics of individuals who were actually prosecuted. So I'll jump back to page 1. I believe it's this first go round here. Right, so this is a summation brought to you by Brave AI. In the fiscal year 2020, about 2,100 individuals, let's call it 2,200 individuals, were referred to U.S. attorneys for human trafficking offensive, a 62% increase over the previous year. And there, you can read through that yourself. So we have a good bit of data on the amount of people who are prosecuted for human trafficking, but in terms of actual victims, we don't really know. We can certainly see it, again, jumping back over here, from a global perspective, what it looks like, but we don't really see it from, really into the United States. So that's where we are there. So what I want to drive at, and this is a really interesting thing about this claim that it's some kind of far-right conspiracy theory or dark fantasy to hunt down child sex traffickers. Look, if it is far-right to want to hunt down and do violence on people who abuse children, sign me up, dude. Sign me all the way up. Sounds dope. It sounds super fun. Let's take it. Let's get after it. Like, I'm all for it. All jokes aside, it's really strange that we're starting to see a lot of people who are like, actually, child sex trafficking is not that big of a deal. You guys are blowing this way out of proportion. And it's like, my guy, why? And you read some articles on this stuff, and again, being fair, this guy, along with a few other articles, there's a really good article about it from Vanity Fair. I believe it's either Vanity Fair or Variety. I can't remember which. Regardless, a lot of people highlight the idea that pretty much the left and right agree that child sex trafficking is one of the most heinous and immoral crimes across the board. I just find it really strange that there's this point out that the right is apparently just likes to fantasize about doing violence to child sex traffickers. So I have a couple of questions. One, does the left or liberals, do they not want to do violence to child sex traffickers? I find like, again, growing up, I've asked a ton of different people, and the large consensus is that we might actually want to forego that whole no cruel and unusual punishment thing in the event of people who sexually abuse children. A lot of just individuals seems like that's something they would agree with, which I find really weird that they're pulling away from that. But secondly, let's imagine for a minute that it is actually the case that child sex trafficking is not that big a deal, but we do all still agree that it's a very heinous crime. Okay, so let's imagine that it's the case, heinous, dark, nasty crime, and then you have this group of zealots who just fantasize. They get off on the idea of hunting down child sex traffickers and just wrecking them. Why wouldn't you turn those dogs loose on the worst kind of humans on planet Earth? Does that make sense to you? I find that really strange. Like if I was just like a something, and I thought, well, I know that child sex trafficking is not that big of a deal, but it's still a pretty big problem. So why not just turn these zealous dogs loose on it and let them tear after it? If it really helps them scratch that itch, go for it. I just find it really weird that we're seeing this reaction from the left. Firstly, that as if high-end child sex trafficking is not a thing and not a major issue. Secondly, I find it really weird they're trying to peg that to the alt-right. And then lastly, I find it very strange that they're trying to tamp down. Let's imagine that it is an alt-right, a far-right fantasy. Or why would you try and tamp that down? Okay, cool. You don't again, cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war being apparently far-right extremists on your enemies, which are apparently child sex traffickers. Like, why wouldn't you do that? That seems like a win-win all the way through. So anyway, I wanted to touch in on this. I just find the whole thing a little strange. And my wife and I have plans to go see Sound of Freedom in the near future. We do have 2 very young children, so it's kind of hard to get out the house together with that. But it's on the plans to do. I'm looking forward to it because apparently it's a really good movie. As of this recording, it just knocked off Insidious as the #1 movie of the weekend. So it's now Sound of Freedom, Insidious, and Indiana Jones. And so, wow, that's awesome, especially from a kind of religious movie. That's kind of another thing. I wonder if it's the religion component. If it's the fact, because it's apparently made by, I think the company's called Angel Studios or Angel Films, but apparently very Christian, very pro-God message. Maybe that's why it's getting the hate. If so, that's, again, kind of silly. If you've got a bunch of individuals who are trying to wage a crusade against child sex trafficking, why wouldn't you just let that go? At any rate, I thank you for being here. My name is Dan Weichart of Weichart Media. And again, I thank you to Badass Patriot Company for the sponsor. You can slide on over to badasspatriotco.com, get some dope merch, some sweet shirts. That'd probably be one of the best ways you can support the channel. Also, please throw me a like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this particular comment. Thumbs up on Rumble, all that stuff on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Weichart Media on both accounts. We thank you. We'll see you next time. Peace.